You keep it. In my house, kindness is never for sale.
You keep that money, sir. Not because you're poor, but because tonight you're my guest. And in my house, guests don't pay for kindness. That's what she said. $5. That was all he offered her, a crumpled bill from a soaked, trembling hand. And that's what she said. Calm, certain, like it was the most normal thing in the world. But it wasn't. That sentence didn't just stop a billionaire in his tracks. It detonated a dynasty. Welcome to Hidden Worth, where we uncover the extraordinary value hidden in ordinary lives. If you're new here, settle in. This is one of those stories that just might change the way you see people. It was just after 10 p.m. on a storm-soaked Tuesday in Atlanta, Georgia, the kind of night when even streetlights seem tired. The Route 9 Diner, a retro-style spot with flickering neon, was nearly empty. A few truckers, a couple of students, and behind the counter, Zariah Monroe, early 20s, gorgeous but not flashy. She had high cheekbones, smooth cocoa skin, and an afro bun that frames her face like a crown she was unaware she wore. Her uniform was crisp. Her shoes, 2 sizes too big. They were borrowed. Like her car, like her luck lately. Zariah was used to surviving on grace and grit, working double shifts, dodging sleazy comments from her boss, and swallowing microaggressions with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was the kind of woman who made broken things feel whole again, just by being kind. And tonight, she'd hit her limit. Her phone buzzed in her apron. Another message from her landlord. Another warning. Rent was 3 days late, again. Her little brother back home needed a refill on his asthma medication, and the diner's tips barely cover gas. Then, the bell above the door rang. The man who walked in didn't look like he belonged. He was older, white, dripping wet, and wrapped in a filthy coat that clung to him like regret. His boots squeaked with every step. Every pair of eyes in the diner followed him, not with concern, but with disgust. "Bathrooms are for paying customers," barked Travis, the manager, before the man even reached the counter. But Zariah stepped in. "He's not asking for favors," she said. "He's asking for food." She served him soup. She offered warmth. She made space when the world shoved him out.
Vah! And when he tried to give her his last $5, his pride clinging to paper, she gave it back, along with that one line that would change everything. Not just for her, but for him, for an empire, and for every person who's ever been judged for how they look, not who they are. So what did the billionaire do next? He rewrote his will. And this waitress, she didn't just serve a bowl of soup. She inherited a legacy. Stick around, because this is the true story of how $5, a bowl of soup, and a single act of kindness exposed a fortune's true heir. Zariah Monroe wasn't born into wealth, influence, or opportunity. She was born into reality. Her first cries echoed through a delivery room in South Atlanta, where her mother, barely 20 and already worn down by life, held her for a moment, then handed her to the only woman strong enough to raise her, Grandma Claudine, a retired schoolteacher with a voice like warm cornbread and a spine made of steel. Claudine raised Zariah on scripture, struggle, and soul food. She didn't believe in sugarcoating the world. "Baby," she'd say while folding laundry with aching hands, "you're gonna have to fight twice as hard to get half as much, but don't you ever let that make you bitter. Stay good, stay kind. That's the part they can't take." And Zariah tried. She really did. She was the kind of girl who colored inside the lines, got straight A's, and volunteered at the community garden every weekend. She didn't drink, she didn't party. Her dream was to be a journalist, someone who gave a voice to the people no one listened to. She even made it to college, full ride, first in the family. But dreams don't always pay rent. When her younger brother, Malik, was diagnosed with chronic asthma, everything changed. Medical bills stacked up. Grandma Claudine's health declined. So Zariah made a decision most people wouldn't even consider. She dropped out and came home. She took a job waiting tables at the Route 9 Diner, figuring it would be temporary, just enough to get Malik stable, just long enough to catch her breath. That was 3 years ago. Since then, she's become a fixture at the diner, not by choice, by necessity.
Every morning, she ties on the same green apron and prays that the customers are decent, the tips are fair, and the coffee machine doesn't break again. She's gotten used to being called sweetheart by men old enough to be her father. She's gotten used to having her name mispronounced on purpose. She's gotten used to being invisible and hypervisible at the same time. And still, she smiles. Because Zariah's not weak. She's resilient. There's a difference. She walks Malik to the bus stop every morning before her shift, packs his lunch with handwritten notes, reads him stories every night from a library book she renews 3 times because buying her own copy just isn't in the budget right now. Malik is 9. He wants to be a firefighter. He tells people his big sister is a hero, and maybe he's right. But even heroes have limits. Zariah's body is tired. Her hands ache. Her back knots from long shifts and cheap shoes. But what weighs her down more than the work is the knowing that no matter how hard she works, it'll never quite be enough. Her paycheck disappears before it hits the account. Half goes to rent. The rest goes to medication, groceries, bus fare, and sometimes, if she's lucky, a gallon of gas. She's polite, professional, and always 5 seconds away from breaking. Customers don't see it. They just see the smile, the bright eyes, the body that moves like it's been trained to dance between chaos and silence. Men flirt, women sneer. Some people ignore her entirely, pretending not to hear when she says, "Good morning, where can I get started for you?" She used to keep a journal, used to write about the people she met, their stories, their humanity. But over time, the stories blurred together, the names faded. The only thing that stuck was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she was meant for more than this. And yet, she never says that out loud, because in her world, saying it sounds like arrogance, like entitlement. And Zariah Monroe has been told her whole life to know her place. She never expected it to be behind a counter, refilling mugs for people who don't say thank you. But even in all that, she still chooses kindness. Not because she wants something in return, not because she's trying to impress anyone.
But because Claudine taught her that dignity isn't about how much you make, it's about how you treat people when no one's watching. And on that rainy Tuesday night, when the man in rags walked into the diner, Zariah didn't see a threat. She didn't see a nuisance. She didn't see a stain on the booth or a risk to the tip jar. She saw a human being, cold, hungry, alone. And she did what she always does. She showed up. Not with power, not with money, but with compassion. And that was the moment everything started to change, even if she didn't know it yet. The Route 9 diner looked charming on the outside, a throwback to the 1950s, with red vinyl booths, chrome trim, and a neon sign that buzzed like it had a secret. Tourists loved it. Locals tolerated it. But for Zariah Monroe, it was a battlefield with formica tables and a jukebox that hadn't worked in 5 years. She clocked in every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, stepping into a world where she wasn't just a waitress, she was a target. It started small, as it always does. A customer calling her girly instead of her name. A woman raised an eyebrow when Zariah offered cream for her coffee. A man asking if she was on scholarship or from around here. These weren't full-on slurs. No one shouted. No one used banned words. But it was the tone, the glances, the way they said her name like it tasted foreign. Zariah, that's interesting, they'd say, drawing out the syllables like a test she was failing. But the customers weren't the worst part. That honor belonged to Travis, the diner's manager. Travis was in his late 40s, balding and bitter. He wasn't overtly racist, at least not in ways that could get him fired. He'd never drop a slur, but he didn't need to. His racism was the quiet, managerial kind, the kind that smiled while undermining you. He'd schedule Zariah for the worst shifts, late nights, double mornings, holidays, then act surprised when she looked exhausted. He'd hover over her while she worked, correcting things no one else got called out for. "Maybe try smiling more," he'd say, even though she already was. "Don't be so sensitive," when she gently asked a customer not to touch her hair.
Travis let the white server skate by.
If they were late, it was traffic. If Zariah was late, it was a write-up. He'd wink at the new girls, call the young white waitresses sweetheart and princess, while Zariah got Monroe, barked like an order. One day, a customer walked out on a $40 tab. Zariah wasn't even the one who served him, but Travis pulled her aside in front of everyone. "That's coming out of your check," he said. "You people always have excuses." You people. The word stung, not just for what they meant, but for how casually he said them, like they didn't weigh a thing. The worst part, no one spoke up. The other staff, mostly younger and trying to hold on to their own fragile paychecks, just looked away. Eye contact was dangerous in a place like that. Zariah wanted to fight back. God, she wanted to. But she had Malik to think about, rent, gas. In this town, finding another job wasn't guaranteed, especially with Travis ready to sabotage her references if she walked out. So she swallowed it. She smiled through it, and every night she came home and tried not to cry where her little brother could hear her. But dignity doesn't die easy, not when it's been passed down through generations. Zariah carried herself with the kind of grace that makes bullies nervous. She didn't lower her voice. She didn't shrink herself to make others comfortable. Even when customers whispered about her attitude, even when someone left a $1 tip and a napkin that said, "Go back to Africa," she never let them see her break. She kept serving with poise, with patience, and with a smile that said, "You won't win." And that's what made her dangerous. She was unbreakable, not loud, not rude, not angry, just steady, strong, in a way that made people uncomfortable because it reminded them of what they lacked. Travis hated that about her, but there was something else, something worse, jealousy. He knew Zariah had the respect of the regulars. Even the ones who didn't understand her liked her. She remembered names, orders, and allergies. She remembered who lost a job, who just got a grandbaby, and who needed an extra napkin because of arthritis. She didn't serve food, she served humanity. And Travis, he knew she'd never be stuck here forever. That's why he kept her down.
That's why he nitpicked. That's why he assigned her the worst sections of the diner, next to the broken booth or by the sticky window with the bad hinge. He needed her to feel small so he could feel big. And yet, Zariah never gave him the satisfaction. She kept her head high, her apron clean, and her kindness sharp. But even diamonds crack under pressure. And on that stormy night, with her tips drying up, her rent past due, and her spirit nearly empty, Zariah was standing at the edge. She didn't know it, but something was coming. A test. A moment that would force the world to look at her, really look. Not just as a waitress, but as the woman who would inherit an empire. The storm outside had gotten worse. Thunder rolled through the Atlanta skyline like distant drums, and rain poured in sheets against the diner's wide front windows, streaking the glass until the world outside looked like it was melting. Inside, the overhead lights flickered just once, enough to make everyone look up, then steadied. Zariah stood behind the counter, her arms crossed loosely as she stared at the register. Her body ached from 12 hours on her feet. Her stomach growled, but she didn't have enough tips to justify a meal break. Maybe just another cup of coffee. She reached for the pot. That's when the bell above the door jingled. It was a soft sound, easy to ignore. But the moment that man stepped inside, the entire diner shifted. The conversation at the corner booth stopped. Silverware froze halfway to mouths. Even the music from the old speaker seemed to go quiet. He was tall, but stooped, with shoulders hunched like the rain had been falling on them for years. His coat was soaked through, an ugly olive-green military jacket that looked older than Zariah, and it dripped steadily onto the checkered tile floor. His jeans were frayed at the bottom, and his shoes? They were canvas sneakers, cheap ones. One had a hole in the toe. You could see his sock, wet and sagging. He looked like someone the city forgot. A few people wrinkled their noses. A man in a suit, probably a late commuter, muttered something about "these people" and turned back to his phone. A mother pulled her child closer in the booth by the window. Zariah saw it all, every reaction.
Every flicker of fear or disgust. The only thing the man had done was exist in front of them. Then came the voice she'd been dreading all night. "Sir," Travis said, emerging from the kitchen with a fake smile that never touched his eyes. Restrooms are for paying customers only. If you need a shelter, there's one 3 blocks east. The old man blinked, as if pulling himself out of a fog. His voice, when it came, was rough and dry. I was just looking for coffee and maybe something warm to eat. Travis chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. Coffee is $2. Soup is $5. You got that? The man reached into his coat and pulled out a fistful of damp bills and coins. He fumbled them onto the counter. Some change fell to the floor, rolling beneath the booths. He didn't bend down to pick it up. Zaria didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her voice clear. "I'll cover it," she said. "Add it to my tab." Travis turned, annoyed. "Zaria, he's hungry and cold," she said. Her eyes didn't waver. "Fine," Travis grumbled. "But if he starts begging from customers, I'm throwing him out." The man looked at her, surprised. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said simply. "Sit by the radiator. You'll dry off faster." He nodded, slowly moving to the booth closest to the heat vent. Zaria poured a fresh cup of coffee and carried it over with a bowl of chicken and rice soup. Then, from behind the counter, she pulled a small plastic bag. Inside was a clean pair of thermal socks. She set them next to his spoon. "I keep a few things for folks who might need them," she said softly. "You can take those." He stared at the socks for a long time, then at her. Zaria didn't flinch. She was used to strange looks, but this man's gaze was different. It wasn't suspicious. It wasn't pity. It was a study, like he was trying to remember every detail of her face. And in a way, he was, because this wasn't just any homeless man. This was Victor Langford, CEO of Langford Industries, a man whose net worth was higher than the GDP of small countries. Tonight, though, he wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't anyone, really. Not here.
And that was the point. He was running a final experiment, testing the humanity of strangers. His time was running out. Cancer had made sure of that. What he was looking for now wasn't a treatment. It was an heir. But not of blood, of values, of heart. And in this soaking wet Atlanta diner, he might have just found her. Zaria didn't ask him where he was from. She didn't ask why he was alone, or why his shoes had holes. She didn't ask what his story was, or if he deserved help. She just helped. No strings, no speeches, just soup, sots, and dignity. And for the first time in a very long time, Victor Langford, billionaire, builder, power broker, felt something he hadn't felt in decades: hope. Victor Langford did not rush the moment. He sat in that booth, near the radiator, hands wrapped around the warm ceramic mug, letting the heat sink slowly into his fingers. Steam rose from the soup, fogging his glasses just enough to blur the room. It was perfect. From here he could see everything, without being noticed. He watched Zaria move. She did not glide. She worked. Quick steps, controlled movements, no wasted energy. She carried plates like she respected them, like food was something sacred, and not just an order number on a ticket. When a customer snapped his fingers, she did not flinch. When another complained that the coffee was too hot, she apologized anyway and brought fresh ice water without being asked. Victor had spent 40 years studying people in boardrooms. He could read fear in a handshake, arrogance in a pause, and greed in a smile. But this woman was different. There was no calculation in her kindness, no angle, and that unsettled him. He had seen charity before: galas, foundations, smiling faces holding oversized checks. All of it loud, all of it public, all of it hollow.
This was quiet. When Zariah returned to his table, she asked if the soup was warm enough. Not good. Not tasty. Warm enough. He nodded, said it was fine. She turned to leave, and that was when he decided to push. Victor reached slowly into the inside pocket of his coat. Behind the torn lining, hidden where no one would ever look, was a crisp $5 bill. He unfolded it carefully, then placed it on the edge of the table. Zariah noticed immediately.
She stopped, looked at the bill, then at him. For a moment, Victor saw it, the flicker of hesitation. $5 meant something here. $5 could buy gas, or bread, or medicine. $5 could matter. He waited. This was the test. He leaned back slightly and said, in a tone rough enough to sting, that it was a tip. She said she earned it, said she should take it before he changed his mind. The words were sharp, deliberate, designed to provoke either gratitude or resentment. Zariah did neither. She picked up the bill, but instead of pocketing it, she held it between her fingers and studied it. Then she looked at his shoes again, the wet canvas, the hole, the thin sock clinging to skin. She shook her head. She told him she could not accept it, not today. Victor frowned. He told her not to pity him. He told her he had his pride. He told her that money was money and work was work. This was where most people failed. They folded. They argued. They justified it. They took the money while pretending not to need it. Zariah did something else. She placed the $5 bill back into his hand and closed his fingers around it, gently, firmly, like a decision already made. Then she spoke. She told him that money was a tool for survival, not a measure of worth. She told him that tonight he was the guest and she was the host, and in her house guests did not pay for kindness. She asked him to use the money to buy dry socks. She asked him to do it for her because she would not sleep well knowing his feet were cold. There was no speech, no drama, just truth. Victor felt something crack inside his chest. Not break, crack, the kind of crack that lets light in. He had been called powerful, brilliant, ruthless, visionary. No one had spoken to him like this in decades, not without fear, not without an agenda. She did not know who he was, and that made all the difference. He looked down at the $5 bill in his palm. He had once paid more than that for bottled water on a private jet. He had lost more than that in the time it took to blink.
But he had never held money that felt this heavy. Victor nodded once, slowly, like a man acknowledging a truth he could no longer deny. Zariah smiled, not wide, not proud, just warm. She told him to take his time, told him the soup was on her, always. Then she walked away. Victor stayed there long after the bowl was empty. He watched her continue her shift, watched Travis snap at her for nothing, watched her apologize to customers who did not deserve it, watched her stand tall anyway. This was not luck. This was character. When he finally stood to leave, the storm had softened. The rain still fell, but quieter now, like it was listening. He paused at the counter and nodded to Zariah. She nodded back. Nothing more needed to be said. Outside, a black sedan waited around the corner. The driver watched as Victor approached, no longer hunched, no longer pretending to limp. When the door closed and the city lights reflected off the tinted glass, Victor removed the wet coat and exhaled. He stared at the $5 bill one last time before placing it carefully into his wallet. Then he looked straight ahead and spoke in a voice that had commanded thousands. "Get my lawyer on the phone. Tonight. I am rewriting my will because I just met someone who understands wealth better than my own children ever did." The rain hadn't stopped, but it had changed. It no longer roared. Now it whispered, sliding down the sides of skyscrapers like a secret no one wanted to say out loud. The black sedan moved through the streets of Atlanta like a shadow with purpose, silent and sharp, until it pulled into the private garage beneath the Langford residences, a glass and steel high-rise that touched the clouds. Victor Langford stepped out of the car. Gone was the limp. Gone was the soaked army coat. Underneath, he wore a tailored cashmere sweater, still damp at the hem. His hands, though trembling from more than the cold, moved with confidence. His driver, a massive man named Wallace,
followed behind him without a word. They took the express elevator straight to the penthouse. The doors opened to a room that looked more like a museum than a home, marble floors, minimalist decor, and a scent of eucalyptus and leather that filled the silence.
But Victor didn't pause to admire any of it. He walked directly to his study, a private sanctuary paneled with walnut and lined with books no one else had touched in years. A man was already waiting inside. Elliot Sharp, his attorney of 30 years, sat at the desk, papers neatly arranged, pen uncapped. Elliot didn't look surprised to see him. He had been summoned hours ago with just one line of instruction. Bring everything. We're starting over. Elliot stood. Victor, you're soaked. Victor ignored the comment and walked to the window. Below, the city shimmered like a circuit board, full of lights and systems and people who would never know how close their fates had just come to changing. I found her, Victor said. Elliot paused. You're sure? Victor turned. His voice didn't waver. Yes. The lawyer stepped closer to the desk. Then we begin. For decades, Victor Langford had been one of the most powerful men in the country, CEO of Langford Industries, a multinational holding company with arms in aerospace, pharmaceuticals, clean energy, and tech. He had built empires with phone calls, bought companies over lunch, fired entire departments with a pen stroke. But none of it meant anything anymore, because now he was dying. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, diagnosed 6 weeks ago. He'd kept it quiet. Only Elliot and his private physician knew. Not even his children, Ashton and Caroline, had been told. Why should they? They hadn't asked about his health in years. All they wanted was the empire, the money, the control. Ashton had already begun consolidating power with the board. Caroline had floated rumors of a trust restructure. Neither of them had time for their father, unless his signature was on a check. Victor wasn't angry. He was disappointed. He had raised them in privilege and taught them to negotiate, to win, and to dominate. And they had learned exactly that, but not compassion, not empathy, not wisdom, not the kind of leadership that left the world better than it found it. He had built a dynasty and created heirs he couldn't trust, so he went looking for someone else. For 6 nights, he disguised himself. Different cities, different diners. He had been turned away, insulted, and ignored. In one upscale bistro in Buckhead, the hostess told him he smelled like unemployment and refused to seat him.
He'd be kicked out of a hotel lobby where he used to own stock. But in a tired old diner on a forgotten stretch of road in southeast Atlanta, a young black woman had looked him in the eye, not with pity, not with suspicion, but with respect, and had given him warmth without expecting anything back. She had passed the test no one else even recognized. Zariah Monroe. He whispered her name to himself as Elliot began redlining documents. The old will was shredded, page by page, clause by clause. The penthouse, the estate in Aspen, the island off the coast of Maine, the stocks, the company shares, the offshore accounts. All of it was reallocated, not to his blood, to her. She'll be hunted, Elliot warned. The media, the board, Ashton and Caroline, they'll try to destroy her. I know, Victor replied, eye steady. That's why I want it sealed. Elliot looked up. I want her identity hidden for 30 days after my death, Victor continued. Let them celebrate. Let them think they've won. And when the dust settles, he smiled, not with malice, but with something colder. Drop the hammer. Elliot nodded, scribbling it down. And the company? She inherits controlling shares, full voting rights. If she wants to run it, she'll have help. If not, she can sell it. Her call. And your children? Victor stared out the window. I'll leave them something, he said, pausing. A mirror, so they can look at what they've become. The pen scratched across the page. The ink dried quickly. Victor Langford signed the new will. And as he did,
He felt the weight of his legacy shift, not toward wealth, but toward worth. His eyes closed for a moment, and for the first time in weeks, he slept. It was nearly 3 a.m. when the last page was signed. Victor Langford sat back in his chair, bone-tired but alive with purpose. The rain outside had slowed to a lazy drizzle, pattering against the massive windows of his penthouse, like a lullaby for a city that never truly slept. On the polished oak desk in front of him sat a new document, one that would shock the world when it came to light. His will, not the version his children thought they would inherit.
Not the one filled with trust funds, real estate divisions, and boardroom hierarchies. This one was different, stripped down, sharpened, rewritten with surgical precision. It named Zariah Monroe, a waitress from a diner in southeast Atlanta, as the sole beneficiary of Victor Langford's personal estate. Not because of blood, not because of politics, because of kindness. Elliot Sharp leaned back in his own chair, slowly closing the leather binder. "It's done," he said quietly. Victor gave a slow nod. "Good. Now, lock it down. Full confidentiality. I want it sealed until 30 days after I'm gone." "That won't be easy," Elliot warned. "Your kids, they'll smell the change the moment you stop breathing. Ashton's already talking about assuming the interim CEO role." Victor's eyes hardened. Let him talk. He's been chasing power his whole life. This will show him what real power looks like. Elliot studied him for a moment. "Are you sure about this? About her?" Victor's answer came without hesitation. "She passed the test." She didn't know it was a test. Exactly. He stood, slower now, every joint creaking under the weight of a life lived too fast for too long. He walked toward the large window that overlooked the skyline. His city, the one he helped shape. He used to look out on it and feel pride. Now, mostly regret. "What's the value of a man who built an empire?" he said softly, "but never built a legacy worth remembering?" Elliot didn't respond. There wasn't much to say to that. Victor had poured his life into Langford Industries. Sleepless nights, brutal negotiations, cutthroat deals. He had won, over and over, but winning had cost him everything. His marriage, his friendships, and most of all, his connection to his own children. Ashton and Caroline weren't evil, just entitled, raised on gold, taught to smile for press cameras, trained to destroy competitors instead of protect people. They had everything, except empathy. Victor had once believed that business had no room for softness, that success belonged to the ruthless. But as his time grew short, that belief had crumbled, because it wasn't ruthlessness that stayed with him now. It was Zariah's voice, quiet, but unwavering, as she pushed $5 back into her hand. "In my house," she had said, "guests don't pay for kindness." It wasn't just generosity. It was dignity. It was ownership. It was a reminder of everything he used to believe before he lost himself in board meetings and shareholder calls. He turned from the window. "Make sure she's protected," he said to Elliot. "The press will come for her. Ashton and Caroline will try to ruin her. I want legal support in place, security, a communications team, quiet but ready. We'll build a shield around her," Elliot promised. "You've already started the trust transfer. By the time the will is read, everything will be irreversible." Victor nodded. "I want the public reveal to be surgical, controlled, and I want my final message, my personal statement, recorded before sunrise." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "You want to speak directly to them?" "To everyone," Victor said. "To my children, to the board, to the public, and to her." He paused, then added, "Especially her." Elliot stood. "I'll arrange the equipment." As he walked out, Victor returned to the desk and picked up a pen one last time. He scribbled something onto a notepad. Not legal language, not strategy, just a sentence. A message for Zariah. He folded it, sealed it in an envelope, and wrote her name on the front. Nothing else. Later, when the storm passed and the city began to wake,
Elliot would find Victor in his chair, eyes closed, breathing shallow, the envelope resting gently on his chest. But for now, the city slept on, unaware that everything was about to change, that the girl behind the counter with the quiet eyes and borrowed shoes was no longer just surviving. She was about to become the owner of an empire. It happened quietly. No dramatic last words, no sudden gasp for air, no calls for help. Just a man, sitting alone in the soft leather chair of his private study, watching the city he helped build, while the sky slowly shifted from deep indigo to a washed-out gray. Victor Langford passed in the hour before dawn. Wallace, his driver, was the first to find him. The security team had been instructed not to disturb him unless there was an emergency, and Elliot had left just after 4 a.m. with the signed documents secured in a fireproof briefcase. When Wallace stepped into the room just before 6 to offer breakfast, something felt off immediately. Victor wasn't asleep. He wasn't slumped or collapsed.
He looked peaceful, like he had finished something. The envelope was still on his chest. Zariah was written in thick black ink across the front. His fingers rested over it like a final signature. Wallace, a man who'd once worked private security in war zones, stood motionless for a long moment. Then, with the kind of care usually reserved for sacred things, he took out his phone and called Elliot. "He's gone." That was all he said. Within an hour, the news broke. Victor Langford, 76, dead in his home. The headlines swept through the business world like wildfire. Some mourned, some celebrated. He'd been many things to many people: a titan of industry, a ruthless negotiator, a brilliant strategist, and a corporate reformer in his later years. Tributes poured in from politicians, celebrities, CEOs, and universities. But what no one could explain, what puzzled every financial analyst and Langford executive, was the total media blackout surrounding the will. The board had expected an immediate press release. Ashton and Caroline had already scheduled meetings with shareholders. Rumors had spread that Caroline had been promised the Manhattan headquarters, while Ashton would take over operations. But the estate lawyers said nothing. The trust firm declined interviews, and Elliot Sharp vanished from public view. 30 days. That was the clause Victor had inserted at the very end of the new document. For 30 days following his death, the identity of the heir would remain sealed. No exceptions, no loopholes, no leaks. Those 30 days were not just a legal buffer, they were a trap. Victor knew his children, he knew the board, he knew the media machine, and he wanted them to reveal their true colors before the world knew what he'd really done. And so, the world waited. Inside the Route 9 diner, the news of Victor's death came the same way all news came, through the cracked screen of an old television mounted above the register, tuned to the morning news. Zariah didn't hear the anchor's voice at first. She was too busy pouring coffee, wiping down tables, and running her usual double shift. But then she glanced up. The photo on the screen nearly made her drop the pot. There he was, not in the green army coat, not hunched or soaking wet, but in a tuxedo. A billionaire, a power player, Victor Langford, founder and CEO of Langford Industries.
The segment played highlights of his career. His face was everywhere. Stock photos, gala shots, corporate footage. Zariah backed away slowly. Her mind struggled to connect the image of the man sipping soup in wet socks with the one shaking hands with senators and standing beside presidents. No way, no way. But then she remembered his eyes, the same piercing look, quiet, watching. It was him, Artie. Her heart raced. She reached into her apron and touched the folded $5 bill she'd found in the pocket 2 days ago. She hadn't known where it came from, had thought maybe a generous customer slipped it in, but now she knew. It had been a thank you and maybe a goodbye. Zariah stood there, surrounded by clinking dishes and a low hum of conversation, as the world changed without her realizing she was at the center of it. She didn't know about the sealed will. She didn't know that security teams were watching her from a distance. She didn't know that in just a few days, men in suits would walk through the door, not to eat, but to change her life. All she knew was that the old man with the tired eyes and the hole in his shoe was gone,
and for some reason, her chest ached like she'd lost something more than a stranger, like she'd lost the first person in a long time who had truly seen her. Zariah didn't expect her world to change at 8:47 a.m. on a Thursday. She was wiping down a booth near the jukebox that still didn't work, humming along with the oldies playing softly over the diner speakers. A new day, another double shift, just her and the routine. That's when the bell over the door chimed. Not unusual, regulars came in at all times of day, but the way the air seemed to shift when two men in perfectly pressed suits walked in was unmistakable. Heads turned, conversations paused. Even Travis, who rarely lifted his eyes off the receipt book, froze. Zariah felt it too. Something in their posture was different. Not customers, not tourists, not even salesmen. They looked like they had a purpose. The taller one stepped forward, clean-shaven, mid-40s, eyes sharp beneath a crease-free forehead. The other was quieter, older, carrying himself with a practiced calm, like he was used to rooms that didn't expect him.
"We're looking for Miss Zariah Monroe," the taller man said, in a voice that was polite but direct, like someone who had never needed to ask for anything twice. Zariah blinked. "Yes?" she said, hand still on the rag she'd been using to polish a sticky table edge. "I'm Elliot Sharp," the man continued, "and this is Mr. Wallace. We represent the estate of Victor Langford." And just like that, Zariah's heart did a backflip. At first, she thought it was a joke, a prank, something Travis had cooked up to embarrass her. But their suits weren't costumes. Their eyes weren't mocking. They were serious, too serious. "Estate?" Zariah repeated, voice small. "Yes," Elliot said. He pulled out a slim leather folder and opened it. "You're probably wondering why we're here, and I assure you, we understand the confusion." Zariah's stomach twisted. "I think there's been a mistake," she managed. "I'm just a waitress. I don't have an estate." Elliot didn't smile. "No mistake," he said. He handed her a document, official-looking, embossed with a state seal and legal lettering that made her breath catch. "It's the last will and testament of Mr. Victor Langford," he continued. "He named you the sole beneficiary of his personal assets." Zariah stared at the paper, not comprehending. "Personal assets?" she whispered. "Yes," Elliot confirmed, eyes gentle but steady. "Everything Mr. Langford owned, properties, investments, and controlling shares in Langford Industries." Zariah's breath hitched. She felt like someone was squeezing her chest and refusing to let go. "That can't be real," she said, but her voice sounded uncertain even to her own ears. "I understand this is overwhelming," Elliot said, "and that's why Wallace and I are here. We're here to help you with the legal process, answer your questions, and make sure your rights are protected." Wallace stepped forward and nodded in a way that made people feel better. His presence was solid, like a silent promise that the world hadn't gone completely mad. "But there's more," Elliot added. "Because Mr. Langford's will is sealed, you'll remain anonymous for 30 days. That was his instruction. No public announcement until that period has passed." Zariah's eyes widened. "So no one else knows?" "No," Elliot said. "Not yet." Travis, who had been listening with a stunned expression, suddenly interrupted. "What are you talking about?" he blurted. "Zariah."
"Own Langford Industries? That is a joke." Elliot fixed him with a polite but icy stare. "Sir, if you have no business here, I suggest you return to work." Travis sputtered, taken aback. Zariah felt mortified on his behalf, but all she could focus on was the document in her hand, the weight of the paper suddenly heavier than any tray she had carried. Elliot stepped closer. "You have rights," he said softly, "and protections. You are not alone in this." Zariah blinked back a sudden rush of emotion, fear, disbelief, and something dangerously close to hope. I don't even know what to say," she whispered. "That's okay," Elliot said. None of this was expected, but it was Mr. Langford's final decision. Zariah's mind raced back to that night in the diner. Soup, socks, the rain, the $5 bill. She remembered how he had looked at her, not with pity, not with judgment, but with an honest, open gaze that made her feel seen. Could this really be the same man? Was this real? Elliot didn't rush her for an answer. Instead, he handed her a business card. "We can walk through each step together," he said, "one thing at a time." Zariah stood there, surrounded by the hum of the diner
and the curious stares of regulars who had no idea what had just transpired. Her world had just tilted on its axis, and she wasn't sure which way was up. All she knew was this: life had just changed, and unlike anything she had ever experienced before, it didn't feel like something she had to navigate alone. It didn't take long for the world to notice. Exactly 30 days after Victor Langford's death, the embargo lifted. At 9 a.m. sharp, Elliot Sharp held a press conference outside the Langford Tower in downtown Atlanta. No fanfare, no media circus, just a prepared statement, delivered clearly, confidently, and without apology. Per the final wishes of the late Victor Langford, he announced, the sole beneficiary of his personal estate, including controlling shares in Langford Industries, is Miss Zariah Monroe. The silence that followed was palpable. Then came the explosion. Headlines spread like wildfire across every major outlet. Financial news anchors stumbled over her name. Morning talk shows ran segments titled Waitress turned billionaire, and from hash browns to high-rises.
Her old social media posts, most of which hadn't seen daylight in years, were suddenly trending. Journalists camped outside the Route 9 diner. Cameras zoomed in on every inch of her face, every step she took, and every piece of clothing she wore. And that's when the ugliness started. It wasn't just curiosity. It was doubt. It was judgment. It was racism, dressed in polite phrasing and subtle digs. She doesn't have a degree, some said. She worked in food service. What does she know about business? Others asked. But beneath those surface criticisms was something deeper and far more venomous. She's black. That fact, though never stated outright on cable news, pulsed through the coverage like an electric current. On social media, it was worse. Strangers called her a fraud, a gold digger, a fluke. Trolls posted pictures of her uniform and compared it to the Langford estate. Some asked if she had done something to earn the fortune. One even tweeted, "Bet she charmed the old man with a smile and a sob story." Zariah saw it all. Not because she went looking for it. She didn't have to. The noise found her. In her inbox, in the mail, through reporters who shouted questions at her while she walked Maya to school. She didn't answer them, not because she was ashamed, but because she didn't owe anyone an explanation. Still, the weight of it sank deep. Every headline questioning her capability wasn't just about her resume. It was a message to every girl who looked like her, grew up like her, and worked like her. You don't belong here. Zariah had seen it her whole life. The way customers left pennies instead of tips when they thought she wasn't doing enough. The way store clerks followed her when she browsed. The way landlords raised their eyebrows when she mentioned being a single mom. But this was different. This was global. And now, her daughter was seeing it too. Maya, only 7, had asked that morning why people were calling her mom lucky, like it was a bad thing. Zariah had knelt in front of her and said the words carefully. Because, baby, some people don't understand that hard work and kindness are stronger than money. But you were kind, Maya said. That's why he picked you. Zariah nodded, hugging her close.
And for một lúc nữa, she let herself believe that truth was still louder than the noise. Inside the Langford Tower, the board of directors wasn't as calm. There were murmurs of removing her from the controlling seat, citing reputational risk. A leaked email thread showed one executive referring to her as the PR nightmare we didn't vote for. Elliot, ever the strategist, met each attempt with calm legal fire. The will is binding, he told them. Victor gave her the reins. You don't have to like it, you just have to respect it. And so, with half the country watching and the other half judging, Zariah walked into her first board meeting in a tailored blazer, borrowed from Elliot's assistant, and a spiral notebook in her hand. She didn't pretend to know everything, but she did know people, and she knew what Victor had seen in her: heart, honesty, and an unshakable moral compass. The room full of men in $1,000 suits might have underestimated her, but Zariah Monroe was not here to prove them wrong. She was here to lead. As soon as the press conference ended,
Ashton and Caroline Langford went to war. They didn't throw chairs, they threw lawyers. They didn't grieve, they schemed. They didn't ask why their father had left everything to a stranger. They demanded to know how quickly they could reverse it. Inside a luxury suite at the Four Seasons in downtown Atlanta, the siblings sat across from a team of legal heavyweights, corporate fixers, PR strategists, and forensic accountants. The room smelled like espresso and ambition, and it buzzed with urgency. "This is character assassination," Caroline hissed, stabbing her finger into a printed article. "She's flipping pancakes in April and controlling a multi-billion-dollar company by June? No, that doesn't happen." Ashton, arms crossed, eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night, leaned toward the lead attorney. "We're talking undue influence, mental instability. My father had cancer. How do we know he wasn't manipulated?" The lawyer, a woman named Regina Cross, adjusted her glasses. "We've reviewed the will. It was filed cleanly. The trust was revised with full notarization, and the language is airtight." "We don't care if it's airtight," Ashton snapped. "We care if it can be cracked." Caroline jumped in. "Can we investigate her? Dig up her past?"
I want to know who she dated, what she posted on social media, and whether she jaywalked when she was 15. I want dirt. Regina hesitated. "Go ahead and say it," Ashton said bitterly. "You think we are the villains." Regina didn't flinch. "I think you're grieving, but this approach won't win public favor." "Who cares about public favor?" Caroline spat. "We're not running for office. This isn't about optics. It's about our legacy. Our father raised this company from nothing, and now a waitress," she hissed the word, "gets to make executive decisions." She stood abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the city her father once ruled. Her voice softened, but not kindly. "You know what burns me the most," she said. "It's not that he left us out. It's that he never said a word, not a warning, not a conversation. He just erased us." Ashton stared at the floor. He hadn't admitted it out loud, but that was what gnawed at him too. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about what it said, that their father didn't believe in them, that in his final moments he saw more promise in a diner waitress than in the children who shared his last name. Caroline turned, her expression sharper now. "If he wants to test us from the grave, fine, let's give him something to regret." They launched a coordinated campaign within 48 hours. First came the leaks, anonymous sources feeding gossip to tabloids, whispered rumors of a secret relationship between Victor and Zaraya. One blog ran the headline, "From Booth to Bedroom, the Billionaire's Mystery Mistress." Then came the legal maneuvering, challenges to the trust citing emotional manipulation, lack of mental capacity, and breach of fiduciary duty. None stuck, but that wasn't the point. The goal wasn't to win, it was to break her. Zaraya's face was splashed across cable news. Pundits debated her suitability. Anonymous commenters flooded her with messages that dripped with hate, most of it coded, some of it cruelly blatant. They attacked her background, they attacked her family. They even tried to go after custody of Maya, filing a petition in a family court citing concerns over new wealth and environmental stability. It was a calculated move, but Zaraya didn't fold, not even close.
Because what Caroline Va Ashton failed to understand was this. Zaraya Munro has spent her whole life fighting to be seen. She'd fought to pay rent, fought for dignity, fought for Maya. She had been underestimated, overworked, and overlooked by people with bigger wallets and smaller hearts. And now, she had power. She had the truth, and she had nothing to lose. So while Victor's children poured their energy into tearing her down, Zaraya quietly began building something new. Not for revenge, for legacy, the one Victor meant her to carry. And unlike them, she would do it with grace. The boardroom on the 42nd floor of Langford Tower was colder than usual that morning, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the atmosphere. The walls were glass, the table was polished mahogany, and every chair was filled with a face that had once bowed to Victor Langford. Now, they were trying to decide if they should bow to someone else. Zaraya Munro sat at the far end of the long table. Her back was straight, her expression was calm. She wore a fitted navy suit, borrowed from Elliot's assistant once again, with her natural pearls pulled back in a low twist.
No diamonds, no brand names, just presence. Across from her sat Caroline and Ashton, flanked by their attorneys and a few allies on the board who still viewed Zariah as an outsider. This emergency meeting, Ashton began, clearing his throat, has been called to address the growing instability of leadership within Langford Industries. Instability? Elliot said from Zariah's right. You mean the kind created by your smear campaign, public sabotage, and baseless legal attacks? Ashton ignored him. Miss Monroe, with all due respect, you lack the experience, education, and qualifications to manage a company of this size. Zariah didn't flinch. I'm not here to micromanage aerospace contracts, she said evenly. I'm here because Victor Langford, your father, trusted me with a different kind of leadership. Integrity, empathy, responsibility. Caroline scoffed. That's cute, really, but this is a boardroom, not a pulpit. There was a soft murmur around the table. Then let's talk business, Zariah said. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder. I've spent the last 3 weeks working with Elliot's team to review every department at Langford Industries. You know what I found?
Over 60% of our lower-level employees, warehouse staff, security teams, and cafeteria workers haven't had a wage increase in 5 years. Some haven't had benefits since the policy changed in 2019. A few board members looked down, visibly uncomfortable. I also found outdated supplier contracts bleeding money, offshore shell companies that serve no operational purpose, and several mid-level managers with HR complaints that were quietly buried. She looked around the room. I may not have a business degree, but I do know when people are being exploited. I grew up watching it happen. I've lived it. Caroline leaned forward, her voice tight. What are you proposing? Charity? I'm proposing sustainability, Zariah replied. Long-term trust between leadership and labor. Ethical reform that keeps this company profitable without making people feel like pawns. She let her words settle. Then she added, and Victor Langford didn't leave this company to me because I know everything. He left it to me because I was the only one in the room who gave him soup without asking for a receipt. A hush fell over the room. Ashton stood, face red. This is a circus, a waitress preaching to the board of a multi-billion-dollar empire she doesn't deserve. Elliot stood too, calmly, slowly. Careful, he said. You're dangerously close to contempt. You think you're going to win this vote? Caroline said, scanning the room. Let's be real. She's a PR nightmare. The board wants stability, not charity cases. But something shifted then. A man near the middle of the table, Mr. Keating, one of the oldest board members, cleared his throat. I've been here since Victor's first IPO, he said, voice gravelly. I've watched this company crush competitors, close plants, and fire loyal workers to please shareholders. Victor knew that legacy. Maybe that's why he made this choice. He looked directly at Zariah. Maybe it's time we stop measuring value by resumes and start measuring it by what kind of future we're building. One by one, other board members began to murmur agreement. A vote was called. Hands went up. It wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. Zariah Monroe would remain chairwoman and retain full decision-making authority. Ashton sat down hard, stunned. Caroline muttered something under her breath that no one heard, but everyone understood. The board had spoken, and the woman they tried to silence had just made history.
Zariah didn't waste time. The board had voted, the noise had passed, the cameras had faded, and now the real work began. In her first 60 days as chairwoman of Langford Industries, Zariah Monroe proved one thing above all. She wasn't just a symbol, she was a strategist. She started small, by listening. Every morning at 8 a.m., she sat down in the employee cafeteria with a notebook, a cup of black coffee, and no entourage. She talked to janitors, interns, and shift leads. She asked questions, not about profits or KPIs, but about childcare needs, burnout, workplace culture, and ideas no one had ever asked to hear before. And people responded, because Zariah didn't speak like a CEO. She spoke like someone who had been on the other end of bad policies, like someone who had cleaned a bathroom stall in silence while executives laughed in the next room. She understood that spreadsheets didn't reflect the real weight of overtime, of skipped lunches, of carrying 2 jobs and a sick kid on your back. So she made bold changes. First came the Langford living wage policy. Every full-time employee, from mailroom to factory line, received a raise that reflected the actual cost of living, not just the minimum allowed by law. Then came benefits, dental, vision, paid parental leave, tuition assistance, a mental health hotline staffed with professionals instead of automated voices. But she didn't stop there. She launched a new initiative, Project Grace, named after her late mother. It was a community outreach program that partnered with public schools in underfunded neighborhoods to provide laptops, mentorship, and internship pipelines straight into Langford departments. Her critics, especially in finance, called it expensive and idealistic, but the numbers told another story. Productivity went up, turnover dropped, public support soared. Langford Industries, once known for cold efficiency, was suddenly leading in employee satisfaction and brand trust. Social media buzzed with the hashtag led by Zaria, and major news outlets ran segments on the CEO who came from the diner. But success didn't change her. Every Tuesday night, Zaria and Maya still sat in booth 6 at the Route 9 diner, the same spot where it all began, except now the diner was owned by a non-profit foundation she'd created, the Monroe Fund. Meals were pay what you can, no one was turned away.
And the walls were lined with photos of everyday heroes, teachers, nurses, janitors, grandparents, whose kindness had changed lives in quiet ways. When asked in an interview what her goal was, Zaria didn't mention market share or global expansion. She said simply, to make people feel seen. And that's what she did. From the mailroom to the C-suite, Zaria didn't just lead with her brain, she led with her heart. She made space for others the way no one had ever made space for her. And in doing so, she didn't just change a company, she redefined what leadership looked like. Not ruthless, not elite, but rooted in grace, strength, and the belief that sometimes the right person for the job isn't the one with the fanciest title, but the one who knows what it means to stand in the rain, give your last $5, and still show up the next day to serve others. Zaria didn't forget where she came from. She brought it with her, all of it. And in doing so, she didn't just carry Victor Langford's legacy, she built one of her own. Zaria Monroe's story was more than just about billions in the end. It wasn't about corporate takeovers or luxury estates. It wasn't even about inheritance, really. It was about value and who gets to define it. Zaria never asked for a spotlight. She didn't wake up hoping to wear a title or sit in a leather chair at the top of a glass tower. She just wanted to pay rent, keep her brother safe, make it to the next shift, and maybe, if the world was kind, leave it a little better than she found it. But when the world finally looked her way, she didn't shrink. She stood tall. Not because she had power, but because she knew what it meant to live without it. She knew what it meant to be invisible, to be talked over, judged, underestimated. And in every boardroom, every press interview, every quiet decision no one would ever applaud, she remembered that. See, sometimes the greatest leaders don't come from Ivy League schools. Sometimes they come from behind diner counters. Sometimes the people with the purest hearts are the ones who've had the hardest lives. And sometimes what looks like luck is really the universe rewarding someone who gave, even when they had almost nothing left to give.
That night at the diner, Zaria didn't see a billionaire in rags. She didn't see a test. She didn't ask what she might get in return. She just saw a man who was cold, and she offered warmth, not because she had extra to spare, but because she believed that kindness wasn't a transaction, it was a responsibility. Victor Langford saw that. Maybe for the first time in years, he saw what a real legacy looked like, not in buildings or bank accounts, but in the strength of someone who refuses to let the world harden them. And that's the lesson. True wealth is not measured in dollars, it's measured in character. It's the courage to be kind in an unkind world. It's the decision to see someone, truly see them, when everyone else walks by. It's standing your ground when people call you unqualified, unworthy, and undeserving, and proving them wrong, not with revenge, but with grace. So if no one else can see you on a shift,
fighting a war that no one else can see, or just wondering if the good things you do make a difference, keep in mind that someone is always watching, and little things like a smile, a bowl of soup, or a kind word can mean more than you think. Zariah Monroe didn't plan to change the world. She just chose not to let it change her. And in the end, that was enough. Thank you for watching Hidden Worth. If this story moved you, leave a comment and let us know what part stayed with you. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Because sometimes the most powerful story is hidden in plain sight.